I think you could say right now it's a two-man race. I mean, even though DeSantis is far back, he's way ahead of anybody else.
You see that between 70 and 80% of Republican voters are picking either Donald Trump, who's the big dog, or Ron DeSantis, who, also gets a pretty sizable chunk of people. And I think that's because Republican voters like what they've done while in office.
Now, in this two-man race, Trump has a commanding, huge primary lead. New polls published by McLaughlin and CBS News YouGov show that Trump is beating DeSantis by 36% in both. Now, the former New Hampshire Republican Party chair even noted that the former president's organizational skills, adding that by comparison, the DeSantis people are rookies. Now, for its part, the DeSantis team rejects that, saying the machine is built, full of rocket fuel and ready to launch. Well, as far as the polling goes, they say that their candidate is the only one who can win a general. And for evidence, they're pointing to a number of battleground state polls showing that Trump is struggling versus Biden, while DeSantis wins all the hypothetical matchups. So where do we stand at this point? Joining me now is Chris Wilson, pollster for Never Back Down, a DeSantis-aligned super PAC, and Robert Cahaly, senior strategist and pollster for the Trafalgar Group, which is not affiliated with any campaign. Chris, first round to you. Are battleground polls in this hypothetical matchup really enough to go off of right now to, proclaim that, DeSantis is the only one who can win this?
Well, that's the case. I mean, Ron DeSantis leads Joe Biden in every single important battleground state. And in fact, Trump loses again to Joe Biden in all those states, but not just in those states, Laura. I mean, one of the most alarming things I've seen recently is numbers came out of Texas yesterday from the University of Texas poll that actually had Trump down to Joe Biden in the Lone Star State. And look, if you can't hold Texas, then you probably shouldn't be the nominee. And let's look at the implications of that, the ramifications of a Joe Biden victory, which right now, not even giving Joe Biden Texas, if you still keep that in the Trump column, if it was a Trump-Biden race, you would have a wipeout in the Electoral College, similar to what occurred between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And I think if that happens, then you're looking at a Democrat taking the House back, Democrats expanding their lead in the Senate, they get rid of the filibuster, they stack the Supreme Court, Washington, D.C. becomes a state. It's just the list goes on and on, the problems that are created by Donald Trump as the nominee. And that's why it's so important that Ron DeSantis is the nominee. And I would say that if you look at the organization that's being put together by Never Back Down, the preparation is there, in fact. And when you begin to look at the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, the DeSantis organization there, I think, will be very, very strong.
All right, Robert, now you were very famous for being the only pollster to correctly call Trump's win in 2016. I don't think you got it right in 2020, but you say that there are some things that Trump has definitively going for him in these swing states. Explain.
Yeah, actually, we had the lowest error rate of any pollster in 2020 as well. Just a little difference in the final outcome. But no, what we're seeing, it is easy to rely on some of the, you got polls that are showing that Trump can win the swing states and some that are saying that he can't. But it really depends on who's doing the polling, what their incentive is. University of Texas, they've never thought the Republicans could win Texas. So I'm not going to fool with that. But there are numerous Republican candidates who can win this general election, and Donald Trump is most certainly one of them. One of the things that people are really upset about and worried about these days is with, Putin and Xi and those guys getting together. It's made people very scared, more than even at any point during the Cold War. And so if you ask a simple question, would Russia have invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump was president? Every one of those same swing states, majority say no. And then when you give the most famous, Reagan question, are you better off now?
Robert, but the number one issue, is the economy. It's the inflation, prices, and the economy. That's where Trump has an unbelievable record. I mean, 2019, 2018 exactly versus today, to me, that's his strongest argument for winning. But to Chris's point, I think what DeSantis is going to say, Tris, you can correct me, DeSantis is going to say something like, well, Trump's policies were awesome, and we salute Donald Trump, but I'm going to win this thing. I'm going to win women. I'm going to win suburban women. I'm going to win independents. And for those people, he's toxic. That's what I bet DeSantis is going to argue. So what does Trump say to move these polls of the independents and the suburban women toward him to combat what I believe DeSantis is going to argue?
Well, I can't speak to what Trump's going to do, but what I can say is when, one of the questions we ask is, the Reagan test, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Absolutely. That's another one of those tests where this economy is a leading indicator, and people say they were better off than Trump's economy. We've never had two guys who have both been president in our lifetime run and have a full comparison. Americans are very good with A-B choices. And I know that some of the people with DeSantis and other candidates will say, well, Trump has been demonized and we have a better shot. Well, remember when the liberals all liked Elon Musk? He speaks up for free speech and all of a sudden he's a pariah. It doesn't matter who the Republicans nominate, they're going to go after him with the same vicious vigor that they have Trump. And so anybody who thinks any of the other Republican candidates, well, it'll be a panacea and everybody just can't wait for them to get elected, that's not reality.
Oh, no, the press is going to savage any Republican nominee. I think, Robert, you're absolutely right. But, Chris, one of the things that the big donors are clearly concerned about is the focus on the cultural issues. I love what DeSantis is doing on the cultural issues, but since the number one issue for the country and those independent voters is the economy, do you see DeSantis in a general really shifting to economic concerns and perhaps moving away from these other issues, again, that people like, I love this stuff, but those people who are wary of them, abortion, Peter Thiel, one of them, said he could support DeSantis, but wants the focus to be on the economy?
Sure. Well, it's look, I'm right there with you in terms of appreciating what he's done and taking on corporate capitalism and making Florida where woke goes to die. But I think to look at what someone's going to do in the future, you have to look at what they did in the past. Donald Trump won in 2016, then he ran against Joe Biden in 2020 and he lost. What happened with Ron DeSantis? Well, he won a very close election in 2018. What happened to the state of Florida? Well, you saw a massive change in registration. They went from a deficit of registered Republicans to a surplus of over 300,000. You had people moving in from blue states across the country to get down to Florida, where it became the free state of Florida. And what happened with Ron DeSantis? Not only did he win an overwhelming, record-setting historical victory in 2022, but he did so in a manner that swept Republicans across the state of Florida into office. Now, I'll point out, Laura, he did that in the same time where we expected a red wave to occur nationally, and it didn't. And there is a study by Jacobson in 2023 that shows that is directly attributable to Donald Trump, where there are races in which there was not an incumbent, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. Donald Trump's impact on those races cost us those Senate states. And in fact, if you look at another study by Ballard and others from 2021, in which they quantify the impact of Donald Trump's endorsement and help on Senate races, it cost us 15 seats in 2018, 10 in the House and 5 in the Senate. Well, so overall, I think the impact of the Trump candidacy is not just damaging nationally, but it's damaging down to the state level as well.
Well, he certainly,
the House and Senate level.
Certainly helped J.D. Vance in Ohio, and certainly helped, I think, in New York on some of those House races we won. But your response to those charges, Robert, about what Trump does down ballot?
Well, it's interesting that he would say that Trump is not effective down ballot. And again, I'm not here to defend the Trump campaign. I'm here to suggest that many Republicans have a shot. But in the year when Donald Trump lost, the Republicans picked up a lot of seats in Congress and didn't have the impact that everybody would assume if they lost the presidency. They won all the way down the ticket. So, I mean, that's the inverse logic of what happened last time.
I mean, the fact is we should have won all those states, and the fact that he couldn't win when Republicans at the House level were losing, I think shows just what a weak candidate Donald Trump is.
Well, we're going to see. This is going to be fascinating. And Chris and Robert, we appreciate the analysis. These polls do move, and they're all over the place, and this is early. So, Chris and Robert, thank you so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.